The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Callaway and Marsh Financial had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over downtown Vancouver, and on a clear morning, you could see all the way to the North Shore Mountains. It was the kind of view that reminded people how small they were. Evelyn Sharpe had chosen that room on purpose. She was standing at the head of the table when Marcus Webb walked in, 12 minutes late, still pulling off his jacket like he hadn't quite decided whether he was staying. The rest of the room, 6 people, all of them carefully not making eye contact with each other, had been waiting in the particular silence that forms when everyone knows something unpleasant is about to happen and no one wants to be the one to start it. Evelyn didn't look up from the papers in front of her. "Close the door, Mr. Webb." Marcus did. He was 41, broad-shouldered in the way of someone who used to be athletic and still moved like it, with the kind of face that took bad news without flinching. He'd been with the company for 6 years. He ran the infrastructure team. 3 weeks ago, his crew had brought a project in 11 days ahead of schedule and $400,000 under budget. Evelyn knew all of this. She had his file open on the table in front of her. She looked up at him now. "Do you know why you're here?" "I have a guess," Marcus said. He didn't sit down. Nobody had told him to. "You were late to the Henderson client briefing on Tuesday. You were late to the quarterly review last month, and you were late this morning." She set his file down and folded her hands on top of it. 3 times in 40 days. "I can explain that. I'd rather you didn't." Her voice wasn't cruel. It was something colder than cruel. It was efficient. "I've found that explanations for this kind of pattern rarely change the pattern itself. And patterns matter here. You know that." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Somewhere outside the window, a seagull crossed in front of the mountains and disappeared. "With respect, Miss Sharpe," he said, "I've been with this company since before you took over as CEO. My team's numbers—" "Your team's numbers are excellent," she said. "You are not your team's numbers." She slid a single sheet across the table. "We're letting you go, today. Your personal items will be couriered to you by end of week. HR will be in touch about your severance." Someone in the room shifted in their chair. Nobody spoke. Marcus looked at the paper. He looked at it for a long time, not reading it, just looking at it, the way you look at something you want to remember clearly later. Then he took his key card from his pocket and set it on the table. He took his parking pass out of his wallet and set that down too. He put his jacket back on slowly, the way a person does when they're giving themselves time to decide who they want to be in the next 30 seconds. "Good luck with the Henderson account," he said, and he walked out. Evelyn watched him go. Then she looked around the table at the 6 people who had witnessed this, and she said, "That's all," and they filed out like water finding cracks in a floor, grateful to be somewhere else. She turned back to the window and the mountains and the cold blue morning, and she felt nothing in particular, which was how she knew she'd done her job correctly. What Evelyn didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, because she hadn't asked and he hadn't told her, was that Marcus had been late on Tuesday because his daughter's school had called at 7:15 in the morning to say that his daughter, 9-year-old Britt, had had a seizure in the schoolyard. Not a serious one, as seizures go. That was what the doctor at BC Children's had said, in the careful, measured tone of someone who has learned that the word "not serious" does very little to comfort a parent sitting in a hospital waiting room at 8 in the morning with coffee on their shirt and no idea what just happened to their child. Febrile seizure, probably. Stress-related, possibly. "We'd like to run a few more tests." Marcus had sat in that waiting room until 9:45. He'd called his supervisor, left a message, sent an email. He'd arrived at the Henderson briefing at 10 past 11, 40 minutes late, and apologized without explaining, because he was the kind of person who thought the details of his private life belonged to him, and who believed that if he did his job well enough, the details wouldn't matter. He had, it turned out, been wrong about that. The thing about being a single father was that you were always calculating. You were always running numbers in your head, not the kind of numbers you ran at work, clean and bounded and solvable, but the other kind, the soft, shifting arithmetic of whether you had enough left over. Enough patience, enough time, enough of yourself. Britt's mother had left when Britt was 3, not in the dramatic way that makes for a good story, but in the quiet way that doesn't, a gradual withdrawal, a lease not renewed, a forwarding address in Kelowna, and then, eventually, no address at all. Marcus didn't talk about it. He'd gotten good at not talking about things. He picked Britt up from school every day at 3:15, which meant he left work at 2:50, which meant his day was bounded in a way that other people's days were not. He made up the hours in the evening, after she was in bed, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of tea that went cold. His team knew his schedule. His clients knew his schedule. The new CEO, apparently, had not considered it relevant information. He drove home from Callaway and Marsh through the late morning rain, that particular Vancouver rain that isn't quite heavy enough to feel dramatic, just a steady gray insistence, and he sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. The house was small and on the east side and smelled, in the way houses with kids in them always do, of something between laundry detergent and crayons. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at his phone. No messages from school. That was good. Britt was fine. Britt had been fine since Wednesday, running around the house, dragging a stuffed rabbit named Gerald everywhere she went, completely unconcerned about the episode that had taken 5 years off her father's life. Marcus made himself a coffee he didn't really want and started thinking about next steps. He wasn't panicking. He'd learned in the years since Britt's mother left that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Panic was for people with someone else to hand the wheel to. He just needed a plan. He had some savings. He had a good reputation in the industry. He'd find something. He was on his second cup of coffee when his phone rang. Unknown number, Vancouver area code. He almost didn't answer it. He was glad he did. Mr. Webb, this is Patrice Okafor from Meridian Group. I got your name from David Chen at West Coast Infrastructure. He said you were between projects. Marcus sat up a little straighter. I just came available, yes. We're looking for someone to lead a major redevelopment project in the False Creek area. It's a significant scope. David said you were the best project lead he'd worked with in 15 years. A pause. Would you be open to a conversation? Marcus looked at the rain on the kitchen window. I'm open to a conversation, he said. Evelyn Sharpe lived in a townhouse in Kitsilano, 10 minutes from the office, close enough that she often walked. She had owned the place for 4 years, since she'd taken the VP role at Callaway and Marsh, and she had never quite finished decorating it. There were rooms that still had nothing on the walls. She'd always meant to get to it. She had a daughter named Petra, who was 8, and who lived with her full-time because Petra's father, a perfectly decent man named Richard, had taken a job in Calgary 18 months ago. The arrangement was amicable in the way that arrangements between two people who have stopped loving each other but still respect each other can be. Functional, civil, occasionally sad. Richard came to Vancouver for long weekends every 6 weeks or so. He and Petra video called every other night. Evelyn did not think of herself as a single mother. She had a full-time nanny named Constance. No, wait, she had a part-time nanny. Constance had given notice 3 weeks ago. Evelyn was in the process of finding a replacement. In the meantime, she was managing. She was usually managing. On the Thursday after Marcus Webb's termination, Evelyn left the office at 6:15 and drove to Petra's after-school program, which ran until 6:30. She was 5 minutes early for once. She sat in the parking lot scrolling through emails on her phone, the engine running, the wipers going in that slow, meditative rhythm. At 6:23, her phone rang. It was Petra's program. Mr. Sharpe, this is Nadia at Brightpath. We wanted to let you know, we haven't had any issues, everything's fine, but Petra took a bit of a fall on the climbing structure about an hour ago. She seems okay, she's been calm, but she mentioned her wrist hurts. We thought you should know before pickup. Evelyn was out of the car before Nadia finished the sentence. Inside, Petra was sitting in a beanbag chair in the corner of the room, holding her left wrist against her chest and reading a book with the focused, determined air of someone who has decided to pretend everything is normal. She looked up when Evelyn walked in and immediately tried to look like nothing was wrong, which meant something was wrong. Show me, Evelyn said, crouching down. Petra extended her wrist. It was swollen. Not horrifically, not in the way that made your stomach drop, but enough. Enough to mean they weren't going home yet. Okay, Evelyn said. She kept her voice level. She was good at keeping her voice level. We're going to go get this looked at. It probably isn't broken, Petra said with the confident authority of an 8-year-old who has never broken anything. Probably isn't, Evelyn agreed. Let's make sure. The walk-in clinic on Broadway was busy in the way walk-in clinics always are on Thursday evenings, a waiting room full of people in various states of discomfort, a television in the corner showing a home renovation show with the sound off. A receptionist moving with the particular efficiency of someone who has made peace with the fact that the evening is going to be long. Evelyn signed Petra in and found 2 seats near the window. Petra sat with her wrist in her lap and looked around the room with the calm, curious attention she gave most things. She was that kind of child, observant, unruffled, interested in everything. Evelyn sometimes marveled at her, at how someone so entirely herself had come from 2 people who had spent most of their relationship being careful. Mom, Petra said. That man over there is by himself. Evelyn looked up from her phone. Across the waiting room, a man was sitting alone, filling out intake forms on a clipboard. He had a bruise forming along his right forearm, visible because his sleeve was pushed up, and he was filling out the forms with his left hand, slowly, concentrating hard. He looked like someone who was used to doing things efficiently and was frustrated by being slowed down. Evelyn looked back at her phone. Lots of people are by themselves, she said. He keeps making a face, Petra said, like it really hurts. People in walk-in clinics often really hurt. That's why they're there. Petra considered this. A few minutes passed. Then, Mom, I think he dropped his pen. Evelyn looked. The man was leaning forward in his chair, looking at the floor, and there was, in fact, a pen on the floor about 2 feet in front of him, clearly out of reach if you were trying to avoid putting weight on one arm. He was calculating angles in the way of someone who hasn't quite decided whether to ask for help. Before Evelyn could do anything, Petra had gotten up from her chair, walked across the room, picked up the pen, and handed it to the man. Evelyn watched this happen with the particular mix of pride and anxiety that is specific to watching your child approach a stranger. The man looked up. He took the pen. He said, "Thank you, sweetheart," in the tone of someone genuinely surprised by kindness, and then he looked at Petra properly and said, "What happened to your wrist?" "I fell off a climbing structure," Petra said, with the gravity of a seasoned mountaineer recounting a near-summit tragedy. "It might be broken. Probably isn't. What happened to your arm?" "I got hit by a car door," the man said. "Car door 1, did it hurt?" "A lot, yeah. Are you by yourself?" There was a small pause. "I am. Do you want to come sit with us? My mom's over there." Petra pointed at Evelyn with her good hand. Evelyn, who had been watching this entire exchange from across the room while holding very still, made brief eye contact with the man, who made a face that was somewhere between amused and apologetic. She gave him the small nod that means, "You don't have to, but you're welcome to." He gathered his clipboard and his jacket and crossed the room and sat in the chair on the other side of Petra. "Marcus," he said to Evelyn over Petra's head. "Evelyn," she said. They sat in the particular way of two adults who have just been introduced by an 8-year-old, politely, cautiously, with a slight sense of having been managed. "She yours?" Marcus asked, nodding at Petra, who had gone back to her book. "She is. Good kid. I know." Another pause. The home renovation show on TV had moved to a kitchen demo, tiles coming off the wall in satisfying chunks. "She does that a lot," Evelyn said after a while. "Decides someone needs help and just goes and does it." "She's right," Marcus said. "I needed help and wasn't going to ask." Evelyn looked at him sideways. There was something familiar about his face, not in the way that meant she knew him, but in the way that meant she recognized the expression. The practiced calm of someone who has gotten used to handling things alone. "You have kids?" she asked, because Petra had broken the ice and it seemed rude not to at least stand on it. "A daughter, 9. She's home with my sister tonight, which is why I could come here instead of just," he gestured vaguely at his arm, "toughing it out." Evelyn almost smiled. "How bad is it?" "Probably fractured. One of the small bones. I've been putting this off since Tuesday." "Since Tuesday," she repeated. "That's 4 days. I had things I needed to do, things more important than a broken bone, things that couldn't wait," he said, which was different from what she'd said, and they both knew it. Petra looked up from her book. "Are you two friends now?" "We just met," Evelyn said. "But you're talking like friends. People can talk to people they've just met." Petra looked unconvinced by this philosophical position, but returned to her book. Marcus made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. They waited. Petra's name was called first, about 40 minutes in. Evelyn stood up, then hesitated, and said, "Will you be all right?" "I've been all right since Tuesday," Marcus said, which was again not quite an answer. Petra waved at him with her good hand as they went through the door. The wrist was not broken. It was a sprain, significant enough to warrant a brace and a follow-up, minor enough to not require anything dramatic. The doctor gave Petra a sticker of a cartoon bear wearing a bandage and told her she'd been very brave, which Petra received with the gracious dignity of someone who had expected nothing less. They came back through the waiting room 45 minutes later. Marcus was still there, in a different chair now, closer to the door, his form submitted, his left sleeve rolled back down. He looked up when they came in. "Sprain," Petra announced. "Not broken. I was right." "You were," Marcus said. "How's it feel?" "Like I fell off a climbing structure." She held up her braced wrist with a kind of pride. "Good bandage, I know." She looked at him. "What did they say about yours?" "Just waiting to find out." Evelyn stood there, holding Petra's jacket and her own bag, and watched her daughter talk to this man she'd known for less than 2 hours, with the easy comfort of someone who had simply decided he was trustworthy and hadn't revisited the question. It struck her, not for the first time, that Petra moved through the world with a certainty about people that Evelyn had never quite managed. A willingness to just decide, based on almost nothing, that someone was worth her time and attention. Evelyn wondered when she had lost that, or whether she'd ever had it. We should let you wait in peace, Evelyn said. It's okay. This is the most interesting waiting room conversation I've had in a long time. Marcus looked at Petra. Take care of that wrist. Take care of your arm, Petra said seriously. 4 days is too long to wait. Marcus looked at Evelyn just briefly, with an expression she couldn't read. Yeah, he said. You're right about that. They said goodbye. Evelyn and Petra went out into the rain, which had eased into a mist, and walked to the car. Petra was quiet until her seatbelt was buckled, and then she said, I like him. You don't know him. I know enough. She looked out the window at the wet street. He was all by himself, and he didn't complain even a little bit. That's nice. Evelyn started the car. She didn't say anything. Do you think we'll see him again? Petra asked. I doubt it. I hope we do, Petra said, and that was that, apparently. She opened her book again with her good hand and read the whole way home. Evelyn thought about Marcus Webb. She did not yet know his last name. On and off for the next few days, the way you think about something you've put in the wrong drawer and keep almost finding. There had been something about him she couldn't place. Something in the way he'd said things that couldn't wait that had stayed with her, turning slowly in her mind like a stone in a current. She was in the middle of a budget meeting the following Wednesday when her assistant, a brisk young man named Theo, no, she meant Tom, slid a note onto the table in front of her. Can I interrupt? One moment. She excused herself. Tom was waiting in the hallway with his tablet. The Meridian group called, he said. They wanted to confirm the site visit tomorrow. Apparently the project lead they just brought on wants to do a pre-walk of the False Creek site. They're seeing you because of the Callaway and Marsh stake in the development. That's fine. Confirm it. She started to turn back toward the meeting room. His name is Marcus Webb, Tom said. Evelyn stopped. He just came on board Monday, Tom continued, reading from his screen. Strong background. David Chen at West Coast recommended him highly. Evelyn stood very still in the hallway for a moment. Confirm the visit, she said, and went back into the meeting. The False Creek site was raw and enormous in the gray morning, a former industrial lot, being turned into something with condos and green space and a waterfront promenade, the kind of project that took years and made the renderings look like a different planet from the muddy, construction-fenced reality. Evelyn arrived at 8:30 in her good coat and the wrong shoes for a construction site, which she knew and was mildly irritated about. Marcus was already there. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. There was a 3-second gap where they both processed this, and then he said, Huh! Huh! She agreed. He looked different in this context. Work boots, a high-vis vest over a canvas jacket, a hard hat tucked under his arm, a rolled-up site plan in his other hand. He looked completely at home in a way he hadn't looked in a waiting room chair. He looked like someone who knew exactly where he was supposed to be. How's the arm? She asked. 2 small fractures, he said. They gave me a splint. I'm supposed to limit lifting. I've been ignoring that instruction. And your daughter? Something shifted in his face. She's good. She's great. A pause. She keeps asking about the girl from the clinic. Evelyn said carefully, Petra? Petra, he repeated. Right. My daughter talks about her. A Meridian project manager appeared at that moment with a hard hat for Evelyn and an apology about the mud situation, and the conversation collapsed into logistics. They walked the site together, the 3 of them, Marcus pointing out grade issues and drainage concerns, asking questions about the subsurface reports, and Evelyn found herself paying attention to the way he worked. The directness, the lack of performance in it. He didn't talk to impress her. He talked because he was thinking out loud, and he was good enough at his job that thinking out loud produced useful things. At one point, he stopped at the edge of a staked-out foundation area and studied something on his plan and said, quietly, to no one in particular, that setback's wrong. It doesn't match the city's current guidelines. They updated them last spring. He looked at the project manager. That'll need to go back to the engineers before you pour anything. The project manager made a note. Evelyn made a note of a different kind. Afterward, when the project manager had gone to take a call, Evelyn and Marcus stood at the fence line looking out at the water. The rain had held off. There were mountains. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. When you were at Callaway and Marsh. She watched his face. Why were you late? The silence that followed was not a guilty silence. It was a considered one. My daughter had a medical episode, he said. First time. She was fine, she's fine, but I was at the hospital until almost 10. A beat. I should have communicated better. I called in, but I didn't explain. I thought. He stopped. You thought it wasn't relevant. I thought it was private. Evelyn said nothing. The other times the month before, he continued, my after-school childcare arrangement fell through. I was scrambling. It stabilized. He looked out at the water. I was managing. Evelyn recognized those words in a way that made her chest feel strange. I was managing. She had said those exact words to her mother on the phone 2 weeks ago, standing in her kitchen at 11 at night with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, and had believed them, mostly. She thought about the 32nd floor and the mountains and the key card placed on the table with such deliberate quiet. She thought about a man who had 6 years of excellent work and a 9-year-old at home and hadn't told her any of it because he was the kind of person who handled things himself and didn't expect that to be a problem. She thought about Petra picking up a pen from the floor of a waiting room. "I made a mistake," she said. Marcus turned to look at her. Not the decision. Legally it was defensible. The documentation was there. She was aware of how cold that sounded and kept going anyway, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't ask. She looked at him directly. That was a mistake. He was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate you saying that. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true, and I need to think about what I do differently." She looked back at the water. "You don't work for me anymore. I'm not asking you to forgive a business decision. I just wanted to say it." "Okay," he said. They stood there with the water and the mountains and the smell of wet concrete and turned earth, and a crow landed on the fence post nearby and looked at them with the blank judicial gaze of crows everywhere. "For what it's worth," Marcus said after a while, "Meridian's a better fit. I think I work better where?" He paused, choosing. "Where the scope isn't already decided before I get there. That's diplomatic. I'm trying." Evelyn almost smiled for the second time in his presence, which was more than she usually managed with anyone in a professional context on a Wednesday morning. "Petra's in school near the False Creek site, actually," she said, and was mildly surprised to find herself saying it. "She'd want a full report on the construction progress. She's been very invested since I told her about it." "You told her?" She asks about my work. Evelyn picked up her bag. "She asks about everything." Marcus looked at her with something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "Mine too," he said. The Meridian project moved forward. The setback issue Marcus had flagged saved the company roughly 3 weeks of delays and a significant cost exposure. The engineers sent a note of thanks that the project manager forwarded to the whole team with 3 exclamation points. Marcus's name showed up in Evelyn's inbox a handful of times over the following months. Project updates, a shared site visit, a call about zoning questions that touched the Callaway and Marsh stake. Professional, direct, no residue of what had happened between them. She appreciated that. She thought he probably did too. In the spring, Callaway and Marsh had a site event at the False Creek development, one of those hard hat tours for investors and stakeholders that involved coffee and paper cups and speeches about community impact, and a lot of enthusiastic pointing at things that would eventually exist. Evelyn went because she was required to, and stood at the edge of the gathering in her good coat and better shoes and watched the progress. Real, visible, undeniable progress, and thought about how much had happened in the year since she'd made a decision in a boardroom that she understood now as a small and recoverable error in a long career that she was still figuring out how to do well. She saw Marcus across the site talking to 2 of the engineers, laughing at something, completely at ease, and he caught her eye and nodded, just once, the way people do when they have a complicated history and have found a way to leave it where it belongs. Evelyn nodded back. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Petra. "How's the buildings? Take pictures. Also, can I have pasta for dinner?" Evelyn took 3 pictures of the construction site and sent them without comment. "So cool," Petra sent back. "Did you see the guy from the hospital?" Evelyn looked across the site at Marcus, who was still in conversation and hadn't seen her looking. Briefly, she typed back, "Is he nice? He's good at his job," Evelyn wrote. A pause. Then, "Mom, that's not what I asked." Evelyn put her phone in her pocket. She picked up a paper cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. She looked at the mountains, the water, the raw new bones of something that was being built into something else entirely, and she thought about a 9-year-old in a beanbag chair who had looked at a man across a waiting room and simply decided, without data, without a file, without a documented pattern of behavior, that he was someone worth walking toward. She thought maybe that was a skill worth learning. The walking toward without needing the documentation first. It was, she supposed, a start.